Welcome to the Model Health Show. This is fitness and nutrition expert Shawn Stevenson, and I am flying solo yet again today, but I've got a special guest on, very, very special guest, and she's been on the show before. She's in the elite group of people who I've had on a second time because it's just so good. Last time she was on, she was talking about fixing your digestion and taking us through the process of actually how does our digestion even work in the first place, and understand that our health is really, this is the center, it's really the center point of our health, and it's birthed from our digestive wellness. And it was a big hit, but we're back on today to talk about thyroid health. All right, thyroid. Everybody's talking about thyroid problems, but we're not really hearing a lot about solutions. And that's what we hope to deliver today. But first, let's give a huge shout out to our show sponsor, onnit.com. Head over to onnit.com/model, and you're going to get 10% off all of your health and human performance supplements. Krill oil, guys. Krill oil. You got to get your omega-3s, the DHA in particular, and the EPA. This is critical to the function of your cell membranes, your nervous system, your brain. All right, your brain is mostly fat and water. All right, fat and water. This is how important essential fats are for building your neurotissue. All right, so, but where are you getting the DHA and the EPA? Good question. Well, one of the best sources is going to be found in krill oil. And why I really love krill oil is that it comes naturally with a compound called astaxanthin, which is a natural antioxidant that helps to protect this very delicate oil from becoming rancid and oxidizing. All right, you're not going to necessarily find that in a lot of fish oils that are out there on the market. So this is why I love the krill oil so much. Also, the Shroom Tech Sport, Shroom Tech Immune, those are also some great products based on medicinal mushrooms, chaga and cordyceps. So head over and check them out. A lot of great stuff. onnit.com/model for 10% off. And also, guys, as you know, Sleep Smarter is coming out. The expanded, upgraded super edition of Sleep Smarter is coming out March 15th of this year. And we're really excited about this and really helping to change the paradigm of sleep wellness in our world today. And I'm super excited to be able to share this experience with you guys because if it wasn't for this show, this book probably wouldn't even exist, especially in the format that it is today. I've had a wonderful team over at Rodale helping to put the book together, and I know that you're going to love it. You're going to be super proud and excited to be able to share this with your friends and family. And this is one of the things that why I'm so passionate about it is that this is getting into the mainstream to help change the health conversation overall, not just about sleep, but also about nutrition and movement and relationships, But our sleep, as you know, is one of the most important fundamental things in our health because if you're not sleeping well, you're just not healthy, period. And also with our relationship context, for example, when you're tired, your best friend can look like your worst enemy, as you know. And so definitely have your eyes out for the book launch. Head over to sleepsmarterbook.com and you can pre-order the book right now and get access to some amazing bonuses that we have. We've got free food from Thrive Market, for example, just straight up free food. You can go and get access to that and some ability to win actually a free bed from IntelliBed, just all kinds of cool stuff that we're going to be giving away in conjunction with the book launch. So head over and check it out. And if you want to get information about my tour dates, where I'm going to be, the cities, exclusive information about the launch, and even possibly becoming a part of the launch itself, head over to sleepsmarterbook.com/launch and sign up there, and you can get all that information, stay up to date. Now let's go ahead and get into our topic of the day and our special guest. Our guest today is the Dr. Jillian Teta, who's a naturopathic doctor and author of Natural Solutions for Digestive Health, which is one of my favorite books, referred to often in the past. She's the creator of the Fix Your Digestion Gut Restoration Program online, and she's received her doctorate in naturopathic medicine from Bastyr University and received bachelor's and master's degree from Boston University in biology and energy and environmental analysis. Jillian lectures on health and fitness topics both locally and nationally and writes for several publications, including Natural Triad, On Fitness, Dr. Oz Online, and she is just one of the best people doing it. I love the way that she communicates. I love the way that she makes this complex material very simple. And today we're going to be talking about solutions for optimizing the function of your thyroid. I'd like to welcome to the Model Health Show, Dr. Jillian Teta. How are you doing today, Jillian?
Hey, Shawn, I'm so good. Thank you so much for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here.
Of course. It's my pleasure. I love talking to you. You're one of the smartest people I know. And let's kick this off and talk about, and by the way, guys, we'll put the link to her past episode in the show notes, so don't worry about that. Head over and check that one out after you listen to this one. But can you start by telling us, what is the thyroid anyways, and what does it do?
Yeah, so that's a great question and a very good spot to start. So the thyroid is a little gland, and it's a little butterfly-shaped gland that sits in the throat. And its fundamental job is to drive the rate at which we burn fuel for particular activities. So how much fuel usage are we using when we're sleeping, when we're resting, when we're working, when we're eating, when we're exercising, and so forth? So we can say that the thyroid drives the metabolic rate of the body. That's what it's doing for us.
Very interesting. And even to drill down a little bit further, the thyroid, and a lot of people don't know this, but it's even more than just a gland. It's like a lot of little tiny glands in this kind of this butterfly-shaped sac. You know, it's very, very strange organ, but it has so much power, as you mentioned already, Jillian, that it's, in a way, it's really regulating our metabolism, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, and it's doing so much more than that. Some of your listeners might be wondering, like, oh, what's a digestive person doing on a show talking about thyroid health? And as you and I were chatting before, there is really this intimate connection between the thyroid and also the digestive system. And so that's what we're going to be diving into today.
Awesome. Absolutely. So first of all, I really want to preface this conversation with some of the issues that actually surround thyroid function today. A lot of people are struggling with, like, hypothyroidism. Like, so what are some of the just kind of outside things besides the digestion piece, which is really probably the biggest piece? What are some of the other things that are impacting people's thyroid health?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, so the rate of diagnosis of thyroid disease is skyrocketing, particularly in the United States and also even in the United Kingdom. And there are a couple issues that we have to consider when it comes to thyroid health and sort of what's going on. For us to be having an optimally functioning thyroid, a couple things have to be going right. For one thing, we have to have adequate conversion of our active thyroid hormone. So we don't have just one type of thyroid hormone, we actually have two. There is an inactive form, which is commonly known as T4, right. And then there is an active form that our cells actually can use and utilize, and this is T3, okay? So T4 has to be converted to T3. A number of things can interfere with this conversion process and can impose like a hypothyroid type state, okay? So some of those things, unfortunately, are our age. You know, as we begin to age, conversion is not as snappy as it once was. Yes. Other things to consider are prolonged caloric deprivation, so like a lot of yo-yo dieting or excessive fasting or like chronic long-term caloric deprivation. Also, mineral deficiencies. So iron, zinc, and selenium are extremely important for conversion, and a deficiency in any of those can be highly problematic. Being chronically underslept or chronically overstressed can also be highly problematic. Type 2 diabetes, chronic liver disease, the use of certain medications such as beta blockers or steroids, and then in terms of digestive function and how that can impact thyroid hormone conversion. If we have an imbalance in our gut flora, right, our microbiome, that can impact conversion, because a very interesting little fact is up to 20% of thyroid hormone is actually converted in our microbiome, okay? So those are conversion issues. And we also have another problem that causes thyroid dysfunction, which is autoimmunity. So this is when our immune cells are actually attacking our own healthy normal tissue. And the most common cause, or the most common autoimmune condition in terms of thyroid, is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is low thyroid function, or Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. And then autoimmune overactivity of the thyroid is called Graves. And then the last little piece, and autoimmunity can be caused by a number of things that we'll probably chat about in a second here. But then the last piece is if you've got, if you don't have autoimmune problems and you don't have conversion issues, thyroid hormone still has to bind to cellular receptors. So that is another area that can be problematic. So for all those things to be considered, we have to consider those things when dealing with somebody that has thyroid dysfunction.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought these different pieces up, because oftentimes in conventional medicine, and why the thyroid has become this huge issues with the thyroid, big catchwords today, and not a lot of solutions. Like, everybody is just popping up with thyroid problems, but not really finding what's going on, is that we're targeting just the thyroid. If the thyroid's broken, we're just going after the thyroid, and understanding there can be a lot of different bumps along the road or blocks in that pathway of even the thyroid being able to do the job that it's probably capable of doing. So I'm so glad you brought those pieces up.
Yes, if we're just focusing on the thyroid and completely ignoring the avenues through which the dysfunction arose, we are doing a huge disservice to our clients and to the people with low thyroid function.
So true. So true. So what we're talking about today, guys, is really understanding the bigger picture and then diving in looking at the micro scale as well with what's going on with the thyroid, so you can really walk away with a powerful understanding. And one thing I want to share before we talk about the gut connection to the thyroid is the fact that Dr. Jillian already mentioned the fact that your thyroid is very metabolically active. This has a lot to do with your body's metabolism, the possible rate of you burning calories, et cetera, et cetera. Just you being able to maintain your weight, lose weight, gain weight, it's regulating that. And this is very small gland just sitting there in your throat, in your neck, which is very weird, but it has a lot of influence over that. And that gland, because it's so metabolically active, there's a lot of electrons or electrical energy going on there. And what happens is opposites attract. So it's going to attract a lot of positive ions, aka heavy metals, could be another potential issue. And also, just even talking about what's going on with the gut health as well, heavy metals can be a big problem. And that's something that you're starting to probably hear more about, which, we can probably talk a little bit more about that later. But I just want everybody to understand that we have to have lifestyle practices where we're buffering our body, detoxifying our body safely and naturally. It doesn't mean you have to go on a 30-day water fast and sit on a mountain somewhere with a Jedi jacket on or whatever. You don't have to do anything crazy, but just basic lifestyle practices like eating cilantro, for example, and also understanding we want to avoid things that are bringing these problematic compounds into our bodies on a regular basis, making sure that we're drinking clean water, right? And not just guzzling like arsenic and, all this excess copper that might be coming through some, just random water source. Also our food supply, making sure our food is grown properly. So it's just stuff like that. So I just want to preface with that. But now, Dr. Teta, can you please talk about, because I'm fascinated with this stuff myself, but how in the world is our gut health related to what's going on with our thyroid?
It's a great question. Shawn, I do think I would like to be a Jedi, though. I do think I would like that. Maybe, I don't know, maybe live on a cave with Luke Skywalker. All right, so a couple things about gut health and thyroid health. The gut and the thyroid sort of go back and forth with one another. So I'm going to just go through a couple relationships that these two systems have with one another. The first is something that I mentioned earlier, and I'm mentioning again because it's really important, which is the fact that in our microbiome, in our gut flora that resides in our large intestine, 20% of that thyroid hormone is being converted to its active form. That means any type of imbalance there is going to impact your overall conversion. And if you're already on the edge and not converting well in other tissues, and that's like what you're relying on, you are going to be tipped into thyroid dysfunction easier than somebody who is not, okay? Thyroid hormone, T3 and T4, also help maintain the tight junctions in the gut, okay? And the tight junctions are the in-between cells, right? There's a little structure, like a little button that helps keep the cell lining intact and with good integrity. That helps keep good separation between the food that we're eating and our immune system. T4 in particular helps prevent the increase of something called intraepithelial lymphocytes, which are a type of highly inflammatory white blood cells or immune cells. So having adequate T4 also helps keep our immune system sort of stable and steady and not overstimulated, not overprovoked. If we have an imbalance in our gut flora, and here I'm going back to the gut flora, we have an increase of something that's called LPS, or lipopolysaccharides, which is sort of like a component of dysbiotic bacterial cell walls. That decreases TSH, okay, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. So we have all of these different connections. If we're constipated and we are not pooping regularly, what happens is we decrease the clearance of certain hormones, particularly estrogen, and we increase something called thyrobinding globulin, which is a protein that grabs and binds thyroid hormone. Okay, so it essentially is making it inert. And then we also can impair gallbladder function. So there's lots of like back and forths. And when we go in terms of, when we think about autoimmune disease, then like the whole gut blows up, because as you know, about 2/3 of the immune system actually resides in the gut.
Yes, yes. So can you go back and just talk a little bit about this, because that's really mind-blowing. The fact that our ability to have normal, effective, special bowel movements is impacting what's going on with our thyroid. Can you talk a little bit more about that and break that down and make a little bit more sense?
Sure. All right. So I'm trying to,
And LPS in particular.
all right. So that's kind of different. So, all right. So here we go. So if we have dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of normal, healthy gut flora, maybe we have an overgrowth of bad guys. In the normal life cycle of a bacteria's life, its little body breaks down and our body breaks down their bodies.
Right.
In that breakdown process, a compound called LPS is released, lipopolysaccharides. Lipopolysaccharides, in addition to doing a variety of things, can decrease thyroid stimulating hormone, okay? It also can decrease receptor sites on your cell for thyroid hormone. And it can stimulate immune cells that are responsible for autoimmunity, right? And then if you have this autoimmune process going on, the thyroid, of course, is a huge target. Dysbiosis, a major side effect of dysbiosis, a major complication or problem with dysbiosis, is that it impairs gut motility. Right. It often slows us down and makes us constipated. A major way that our body removes hormones, particularly androgens and particularly estrogen, is actually through the large intestine, right. The large intestine and the liver. So the liver is filtering the blood. It grabs out the estrogen, it packages it up, it sends it to the colon where we're supposed to poop it out. If we're not pooping it out and your stool is just sitting in the large intestine, well, the large intestine has a blood supply, right? So those spent hormones get resorbed back into general circulation. They end up back at the liver, right, who's working on today's stuff, and now it's got to work on yesterday's stuff that it already worked on, right? So we can say then that when the bowel's constipated, the liver is constipated. Another consequence of this, of constipation, is that the body upregulates a type of protein that's called thyroglobulin binding protein. This is a protein that will grab thyroid hormone. And it's interesting, it's almost like a compensatory mechanism, because we talked earlier that the thyroid is setting the metabolic pace of the body, right? And if our digestion is slow, maybe the body is thinking, hey, we got to slow everything down.
Right.
So we have to bind up some of this thyroid hormone. So that's how something as simple as not pooping can have consequences not only for your thyroid, but also for estrogen and estrogen complaints. So for the ladies, it's going to be things like PMS and headaches and endometriosis and all of these, acne and all these types of things. But also, does that impact your native gut flora? Like there's a lot of different consequences from simply not pooping.
Right. Oh my goodness. Just dropping the science. I love this. And it makes total sense in how we have this really interesting feedback loop, and I love the analogy of like when the colon slows down, when your digestion slows down, your liver slows down. And it's also kind of a signal to your body that the thyroid will automatically fall right in favor as well. So it's so important and if we could just spend maybe just like 2 or 3 minutes and talk about what are some of the just captain obvious things that we need to do. And I know that this much deeper than this, it really boils down to what's going on with your gut flora. But what's some of the common things, practices people can do to ensure that they're having healthier bowel movements and increasing that gut motility a little bit?
Okay. I tend to think of that in several categories. So the first category is our nutrition, right? So we always want to make sure that we're eating foods that are appropriate for us. And so a food that's appropriate for me may not be appropriate for you, and vice versa. So taking the time to figure out what foods work for your body is very, very important. When it comes to people that have active thyroid disease, particularly Hashimoto's or Graves', particularly an autoimmune thyroid disease, there are definitely a couple dietary considerations that they should be implementing. The first is to eliminate completely gluten, and gluten is that protein that's found in wheat and barley and rye and all of those things. The second is to minimize, not eliminate, the intake of raw cruciferous vegetables. So your cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, kale, all of those things. High amounts of the raw cruciferous vegetables can sort of impose like a hypothyroid state. They're called goitrogens.
Right.
So nutrition is huge. Adequate hydration is huge. Adequate mineral status is huge, right? And we know that people with thyroid disease often have issues with minerals anyway, so it's almost like we're adding fuel to the fire here. Outside of nutrition and hydration and minerals for motility, I also, we talked last time about that digestive fire, right? The ability to break down food optimally. So one of my first tier interventions in something like constipation is supplementation with plant digestive enzymes. You also want to make sure, we touched on this a lot already, that your gut flora is happy and healthy. So I'll often recommend like a probiotic and fermented foods. And then making sure, and this is where your book is going to come in handy, that we are de-stressed. A lot of people are stressed and have no idea that they're stressed. They're repressing emotions. They're not good with boundaries. They're saying yes when they mean no. All of those things impact our what we call the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which makes us more cortisol dominant, right? Which keeps us more in this like fight or flight mode, which has devastating consequences for motility. So when it comes to motility, there are these several like categories that we want to like go down this list and check everything off and make sure that we're, crossing our T's and dotting our I's. But sort of in a whirlwind, that's how I approach motility.
Yes. Wow. There's several pieces there. Again, these will be captain obvious for a lot of people who listen to this show, but there's some things that are definitely need to be paid more attention to. And one of the things that you mentioned was the cruciferous vegetables, so the goitrogens, but you said raw. So what about cooked?
Yeah, so when they're cooked, those compounds are destroyed. So it's not as much of a consideration. Right. And if people are curious, like what's the cutoff for raw? I wouldn't do any more than a cup of raw cruciferous vegetables like 3 to 5 times a week. Now, if you want to do cooked, then, maybe like 2 cups every day, but that would be like a cutoff.
Got it.
Another thing that's important for motility and also stress is the way that we eat. So not eating on the run and putting your butt in a chair when you're eating and slowing down and chewing your food and not talking with your mouth full and, not like on your phone while you're eating. We're all guilty of these things, but actually like being present with your body and with your food as you are eating it instead of like, oh my gosh, I got to like do these emails and I'm just going to catch up on this real quick during my lunch break. So that's also key.
Yeah.
Because it lets your body relax into digestion. It activates the branch of the nervous system that is responsible for resting and digesting.
Yes. Oh, my goodness. And I would say, and I know you agree with this, that this is just across the board for pretty much if anybody's dealing with a health issue at all to do that, to really make sure that you're assimilating, digesting, eliminating your food properly is to be present with your food, which, again, it's not super easy today, until you break that habit of, I don't know what people are doing, but eating your food while driving. Well, actually, I see this all the time, actually. It's just so shocking. Like, I'll pull up next to somebody who's just eating a burger or, it's just amazing. So, but another thing that you mentioned, and we definitely need to dive more into this for people who aren't aware of this by now, which we've talked about a couple times in the show, but not directly as related to Hashimoto's thyroiditis and potentially Graves as well, but the autoimmune aspect related to gluten. You said that is ideal to avoid gluten as far as what can happen with this, its impact on the thyroid. So can you talk more about that? How does gluten relate to what's going on with our thyroid and autoimmunity?
Yeah, I'm happy to, because this actually, if we can help even like one person, this is huge. So there's a physician, his name is Alessio Fasano. Probably many of your listeners are familiar with him. He started out in Maryland at the Celiac Research Center. He was actually started out to be a researcher of celiac disease, which is an autoimmune condition whereby upon exposure to gluten with gut injury and a genetic predisposition, our bodies will actually destroy the lining of the small intestine, which of course is disastrous because it creates malnutrition and all this type of thing. He began researching other autoimmune diseases. And he is now at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, my hometown. But what he has discovered about gluten is that gluten is not just problematic in celiac disease, but actually is problematic in a common thread in all autoimmune diseases. And here's why. Okay, so just stay with me for 1 second. When someone with autoimmune disease, or anyone really, eats gluten, another protein in the small intestine is upregulated. This protein is called zonulin. Okay, I know that sounds like a character in Star Wars, but it's a protein called zonulin, okay? Zonulin, what it does is, remember we were talking about those tight junctions, right? Between the cells that line the small intestine. Zonulin unbuttons the button. This allows the immune system that was right underneath the lining of the small intestine to sort of have this unchaperoned access to the food that you're eating, your gut flora, everybody, and stimulates and perpetuates an autoimmune cycle. So no matter what autoimmune disease you have, whether it's celiac or Hashimoto's or lupus or rheumatoid arthritis, we want to come off of gluten. And there are even other foods that you could argue in some cases, like the nightshade family of vegetables, which are your tomatoes, white potatoes, bell pepper, eggplant, black pepper, those types of things. But gluten is huge. And if we can, like I said, if we can get even one person who's got Hashimoto's and is like pounding that gluten to come off of it, I cannot tell you how many people that I've worked with when we pull them off gluten and we do a little gut repair and we do some thyroid support, that we can greatly improve their numbers, get them feeling way better, get them dropping that weight, get them pooping, and in some cases reducing or even coming off of their conventional medication for thyroid. So that's key. I'm glad you highlighted that for me. Thank you.
There's so many pieces there that I want to ask you about. But first of all, I want to ask you about another category, because there are certain foods that are known to be more autoimmune triggers, So I'm curious, because this is one of those things that's borderline for a lot of practitioners who are aware of the impact of gluten. But
Yep.
Beans. What about beans? What about these lectin-like compounds that are found in beans?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot. I mean, we could go down the whole list, right? Like beans and soy and eggs and all of these types of things. So here's my standard answer. When I begin to work with someone and they're first coming in and they've got a lot of things going on and they don't know where to start, what I begin with is an elimination diet, okay? And that is tailored to what they're coming in for, the degree or severity of their symptoms, and then also their frequency of consumption. So if someone's coming in and every single day they're having like hummus and pita bread, like for their snack, I'm going to eliminate those legumes. The truth is that not every single person with autoimmune disease has to be off of legumes. So there is a lot of like, it's a huge gray area.
Right.
So what I do is we do a targeted elimination diet for a certain amount of time that also sort of depends. So we do an elimination diet at least for 4 weeks. During that time, we're also doing a lot of gut restoration, right? We're repairing the lining of the gut. We're making sure that the flora are happy. We are repleting that digestive fire so people can break down their food. We're de-stressing. We're doing all of those things. Then we begin to monitor with laboratory studies and subjectively how people are feeling, right? So you take all of those things into consideration, not just the labs. We never live and die by the labs. It's very important for how people feel. Then after that time, we can begin. There are certain foods, legumes are one, even the nightshades are one, that I will allow people to challenge back in to see how they respond. So after we take a break from that, after we do a little gut repair, a little bit of thyroid tuning, some antioxidants to decrease all the inflammation that's being generated from this autoimmune response, we have like a cleaner slate from which to now test. And so then we begin to test. So me personally, like my experience over the last almost decade is I am not like a hardcore diehard, everybody with autoimmune disease has to be on an extremely strict autoimmune protocol, like period forever. I do take people off of gluten long term, but those other common foods, like we do an elimination diet, but it may or may not be forever. I know that's not a straightforward answer, but it's an honest one.
Yes, no, this actually makes sense. And this is why I said a lot of practitioners who are in the know about this stuff is like, this is a gray area. And the best practitioners are going to pay attention to the person. I love that you said we don't live and die by the labs as well. The labs are important, but we also have to monitor you and how you feel and just pay attention to stuff. But another thing that you mentioned was that these simple practices that are really unknown to the public at large are oftentimes far more effective than thyroid medication. So can we talk a little bit about thyroid medication? Because I know there are people listening who are like on Synthroid and things like that. So what's going on? Why are these medications not as effective, yet everybody are getting put on them just like in a flash once they see their doctor?
Well, so, Synthroid for some people is great. It's a game changer and it works and they feel great and they drop weight and they love it. In my experience, the people that tend to not do well on Synthroid are the ones that have those conversion issues. Because what is Synthroid? Synthroid is just T4, okay?
Right,
so if we're just supplementing with T4, that means we are trusting that the body can convert all that T4 into T3. And if you can't do it, you're not going to feel well on Synthroid, or you're only going to feel well for a couple weeks, and then you're going to need to bump up. So when I see someone, and actually that's a very good clue as to what's going on. So if I see someone that's been on Synthroid for months or years, and they've just had this like ever increasing dose, and they feel horrible, we know to look at conversion issues. Also, a lot of people aren't taking into consideration some of these things to decrease autoimmune activity. They're just exclusively relying on the drug. And if you're just exclusively relying on that and you're still eating all your, hummus and pita bread and like your tofu and your cabbage juice because you heard on some whatever like blog that it was great to like drink, raw cabbage and kale juice like a gallon a day, and you're not sleeping and you're stressed and like you're not pooping and all of these things, well, we are doing a huge disservice by just shoving medication down people's throats. You have to address these things more comprehensively. But again, there are plenty of people. I actually have people in my family. They've been on Synthroid for a long time. They feel great. It's fine. They don't really do anything else. It's good. So, but for those people who are falling through the cracks, there's a lot that can be done. A lot.
Yeah, I love it, love it. And that's another thing that I appreciate about your work because, and this has been my personal experience as well, is that all things are on the table. You know, let's not pull anything off the table that can be effective for somebody and actually change somebody's life. But the basis should always start with what is real and natural. What are the things that you can do to help to eliminate the potential cause? But then we can patch up problems as we go along with conventional medicine as well. And
Yes.
so I think that's really important just for everybody to know that there's some fantastic medications, but there's also these really critical lifestyle practices that you need to tune into. So what about testing? Because you mentioned that the conversion is the
Mhm.
issue. You could take the T4, but is it getting converted? Is there testing that can be done to see if you're converting well?
Yeah. So when I'm evaluating someone for a thyroid problem, if you go to your most family doctors, they are just going to run what's called a TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And the normal levels for TSH is a really broad range. Okay. So we know that lab values are also based on a bell-shaped curve, right? So some people normally are going to be on the higher end and some on the low, and then we're kind of like all in the middle. TSH is just but one tiny evaluation. We also can check things like T3 and T4. Levels of T3 and T4 can give us a lot of insight into conversion. If T4 is adequate or even high, and then T3 is low or low normal, you're not pulling enough T4 over into T3. We also can look at things like reverse T3, and reverse T3 is kind of like T3 shadow. So if T3 is high, it will grab and bind T3 and not let it bind to the cells. I also always check antibodies. Most conventional docs don't check antibodies. You need those antibodies checked to actually diagnose Hashimoto's. And then I also run something called free thyroxine index, or FTI, which also is an indication of binding. So I do a much broader, much larger, cast a much larger net when looking at thyroid labs. The other thing, again, going back to not living and dying by the labs, if someone comes back and their TSH is like dead center in the middle, but they're gaining weight, they're losing their hair, they're losing their eyebrows, they're getting constipated, they have a lot of joint and muscle pain, and if I do a physical exam and their reflexes are slow and they're slow to have their skin is all mottled, those are all signs and symptoms of low thyroid disease. So even in the case of normal labs, if you have signs and symptoms from physical exam and the person's subjective experience, to me that's enough to begin to do some of these interventions. So again, I never live and die by the labs. You have to take the three things into consideration: laboratory evaluation, physical evaluation, and then the person's subjective experience.
Wow. Oh my goodness. You just saved a lot of people a lot of time and money trying to figure this stuff out and understanding what testing needs to get done to get a comprehensive view of this stuff. And I know a lot of people are like, well, how can I see her? She's in North Carolina. So if you go down there, you can check her out. But also, there are wonderful docs all across the country who are on the same page with Dr. Teta. But it's about you being informed, and that's why she's here, for you to understand that there's a much bigger picture here that you need to look at, not just like, oh, my thyroid is messed up, I have hypothyroid problems. There is a way to figure out what is going on, what your specific issue is, and then how to do something about it. So with that said, you've already mentioned some of the things as far as avoiding a big issue with autoimmunity related to the gut health and the thyroid subsequently, but also I'm curious, outside of the nutrition realm, we mentioned a little bit about the stress component.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally I've seen this firsthand in my practice, but people can stress their way right into diseases, even autoimmunity. And it's really about understanding that it's not just the nutrition. It's critical because, you are what you eat. We get that. But what about the stress piece? How does that impact what's going on with us healing our thyroid?
Oh, everything. So simply put, if we're overstressed, what essentially that means is that our autonomic nervous system that is responsible for fight or flight is sort of like in hyperdrive. And if it's in hyperdrive, that means that all of those stress hormones like adrenaline, noradrenaline, and cortisol are elevated at higher than normal levels. So if we're chronically stressed, and stress can look any number of ways, stress can be physical, mental, or emotional, right? If we're chronically stressed and we have all of these higher levels of stress hormones floating around, that begins in turn to impact not just other hormones, like in the case of thyroid, right? So high cortisol blunts or like presses down thyroid function. So it like imposes, if you have high cortisol or adrenal dysfunction, it imposes like a low thyroid state. High cortisol also leads to immune dysregulation. So it impacts the immune system as well. High cortisol also has the ability, like zonulin, to unbutton those tight junctions and to create a small intestine that has a lining with less integrity. So there's truly no system that escapes the impact of chronic uncompensated stress. And I'm not talking about like acute stress, like, you got cut off, or like, get in a fender bender, or like you have an argument with your spouse or anything like that. I'm talking about like long-standing patterns of stress, from repressed emotions, from dysfunctional relationships, from lack of boundaries, from being underslept, all of those types of things.
Wow, this is like breaking news flash right here. It's so important. This is what you do, Jillian. I appreciate it so much. So a lot of people, they're just like, well, I'm doing a lot of stuff she's saying as far as I'm avoiding gluten. I'm not eating these trigger foods that can be causing the hypothyroid issues, the Hashimoto's. But understand, stress can actually unbutton that gut lining and lead to the problem. So somebody's probably doing all this stuff right as far as nutrition, but then they are just detesting every single moment that they're at their job each day and just stressed out about money or a relationship or lack of relationship or problems with their kids or whatever the case may be. We have to have an all-encompassing approach, with our health, and because all of these things make us up. And and that's what the Model Health Show is about, is pointing back to the fact that you're not just parts, and that's what conventional medicine tends to do, is just isolate you into sections. Everything about you matters, and you have the opportunity to really gracefully start to change this stuff, So some of the practices, and we could just talk a little bit about that, because if we're talking about stress, people are stressed out. We've talked many times on past episodes about, the first thing I brought up that popped in my mind was just, the doing work that you don't enjoy. You have the opportunity to change that. Some people are just like, well, I can't because of blank, fill in the blank. I guarantee you that you can talk all day about all the reasons you can't do it. Let's talk about the reasons that you can, or the reason that you need to, just like with food, people are like, I can't afford to eat healthy. And the reality is you can't afford not to eat healthy. And the same thing, where there's a will, there's 1,000 ways. I promise you, there's not just one job. Last night, me and my family, we watched Lilo and Stitch, right, with the kids. And the sister in the cartoon, in the movie, kept on trying to get these different jobs because she had to make ends meet. But it just kept getting messed up because the little Stitch was causing. He's like, it is my family. It is good. Right? And so he's going crazy and causing all these problems. And she just continuously stressed out trying to get this job, to support herself. But the thing was, there was always another option. There's always another option. And we need to open ourselves up to that. So that's first thing. Second thing is consistent kind of stress management practice. Or I don't even like to use the word stress in it, but just a consistent practice to keep you in the more rest and digest system. So can you talk a little bit about what you recommend as far as, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's some Qigong. What do you recommend for people to do to help to modulate stress?
There's two things that I've been recommending of late that are fairly easy. The first is to actually let yourself feel your emotions, particularly negative emotions. We live in a society that's now like everything has to be perfect and good and everything's fine and I'm fine and you're fine and all of this. Like repressing negative emotions is a major cause not only of depression, but there's also links, Shawn, when you and I were chatting before the show, different types of cancers and cardiovascular disease and autoimmune conditions all can be linked back to particular types of repressed emotions bad boundaries, all those types of things. So number one, feel your emotions, whether they're good or bad. And number two is to actually spend more time in your body. So we are all extremely cerebral, we're hooked into the internet, and we have completely disconnected from the physical experience of dwelling in our body. And if you can do the two at the same time, experience the emotions while you're feeling your body, and even how those emotions feel in your body, and stay with it, even the negative emotions will pass through. We call this integration, somatic integration. So those are two things that I often recommend. And then third is, and I do this. I do that prior to personally, but this is something I've been doing for years. Is every morning, unless it's like disgusting raining or something, I go for a walk. I go for a walk outside with my dogs. I don't bring my phone, and I feel the sun on my face. I feel the wind. I smell the air. I look at the trees or the flowers or the grass or the sidewalk or the other or whatever, and I make it a very visceral, experiential walk. Yeah. So I'm not walking to get to a destination. I'm not power walking. I am strolling. I'm in my body. I'm engaging all of my senses. This helps bring up the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest or digest branch, and therefore bring down the fight or flight branch.
Love it. And that ties into being more in your body. Right there.
It does.
Just that practice.
It certainly does.
Oh, wow. That's so awesome. And I've got to point this out, working in a clinical practice for a decade myself and seeing, and this is real talk right here, consistently with the repressed emotions, it tends to be more of the female population that does that, and when it hits the fan, it hits the fan, So I just want to encourage the women out there who are listening to allow yourself to feel, allow yourself to express yourself, express your emotions as well. It might not necessarily be to another person, but you can't just keep holding that stuff in. There's this song called Bag Lady, right? Classic song.
Yes. Yes. I love Erykah Badu's. Did she cover it or did she write it?
I think she made that up. I don't know.
Okay. I just saw that video, just came up on YouTube the other day. I love it. Why are you carrying all that around?
See, you see how we're connected?
You got to put that bag down. Yes.
We're going to put that in the show notes as well. And it's a great analogy to the fact that, a lot of times we're carrying around stuff, we're carrying around other people's stuff. Like we've got a problem with somebody from high school, and we're just like, we're carrying around this issue that we have with this person. You'll probably never see that person again, first of all. Second of all, they're not thinking about you. And if you're just waiting on them to change for you to be happy, for you to put the bag down, you've got a serious problem. So you could just put it down now and it just starts to take this weight off of you. And that's how people feel oftentimes when I ask them with the thyroid, hypothyroid, just kind of feel weighed down, just feeling heavy. And it's not just a physical thing, it's a psychological thing that you can start to work through and let go of. And so I just want to encourage people, not just the ladies listening, guys too, we do this as well. We do, but especially for women, to allow yourself to express yourself, express your emotions, to feel that feeling and not try and fight it and pretend that it's not there, because it is, and the more you suppress, the more chances are you're going to bust out and go crazy on somebody who happens to, maybe they, I don't know, they took your straw that you were going to get at Chipotle or something. I don't know. Who's straw? It's my straw. You're just going to lose it, so allow yourself to do this. I love this, by the way, Hal Elrod, and he's the author of The Miracle Morning, this huge hit book. And he has this thing that he employs called the 5-minute rule, and basically it's not just living in that problem, but oftentimes we don't give ourselves enough attention or permission to just feel what it feels like, get it out, express yourself, whether it's anger, sadness, but then you can be done with it. And the thing is, you don't even have to set a 5-minute timer per se, but like you said, Jillian, it just passes. Once you actually just express a thing, it's just kind of like, oh, okay, I'm done. Yeah. I'm done being mad. All right, let's move on to the next thing.
If you stay with it, and most people, it's our conditioning from when we're children and in society, we are taught to shove away negative emotions. But if you can stay with it and you can kind of stay through that little bit of uncomfortableness on the other side, you feel so much better. So it's like, ripping a Band-Aid off, or like jumping in like a cold pool, like initially you're like, I don't want to, it's going to hurt. And then it's like that shock of letting yourself experience it. But then when it's over, you're like, wow, I feel so much better. That wasn't that bad. And I'm so glad I did it.
Yeah, exactly. And we've talked about cold thermogenesis on the show as well. A lot of benefits with that. We'll put that in the show notes. So that's one big piece. And before we go, there's two quick things I want to talk about. So we talked about the nutrition piece. We talked about the stress piece. What about exercise? Because oftentimes, and I see you like your eyebrows are moving, you're like, yeah. Oftentimes when we're working and battling our body trying to lose weight, people would just beat themselves senseless doing exercise in the gym. Is that the right approach? Is more exercise going to get you there if the thyroid is the issue? Or how is our exercise impacting the thyroid?
No, in fact, I often see the reverse. I often see people over exercising, and they're on the Stairmaster for an hour, and then they're like going to CrossFit 5 days a week. When I start working with people with thyroid dysfunction, I actually usually take them off a lot of their exercise. I get them walking, and then perhaps they can do 2 to 3 weightlifting sessions per week. And I tend to have it more slow bodybuilder style. I tend to like people to begin to do the de-stressing activities first, sleeping, walking, like getting their nutrition dialed in, before we just pound and pound and pound with exercise, because that exacerbates the problem rather than solves it.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, your metabolism is a pretty dominant control center of your metabolism. And trying to kind of over-exercise your way into being skinny or fit, so-called, quote, fit, you're fooling around and not allowing this organ, again, to do its job naturally, So oftentimes, and we've talked about this before, we need to work in, not just work out. So focusing on doing the things that Dr. Teta has been talking about today and finding a way to shift over to the parasympathetic. Because here's what the reality is, that your body's going to be more capable and more efficient at burning calories, at utilizing the energy that you're putting into the body when things are more in balance, versus you creating this kind of just catabolic state where it's just constant breakdown. And also, very harsh calorie restrictive diets, for example, things like that can depress your thyroid, as we talked about before. So Dr. Teta, this has been awesome. And I want to know, there's so much here, though. Do you have any resources that you could share that people can get more information about this? Because it's a lot.
Yeah. So last fall, I created a 5-day thyroid gut school that I'm very pleased to share with your listeners. The address for that is bit.ly. So bit.ly/thyroid school. That's it. So I can send you the link if you want, and you can put it in the notes, but I'm happy to offer that. They do have to sign up, so you guys do have to give your email, but it's a very robust, it's something like 25 pages in a Word document. So it's like a third of a book in and of itself, and it's totally free. So you guys are welcome to that. And it goes through a lot of what we talked about, but more in depth. So more in depth testing, other things to consider. So we talk a lot more about the role of like estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. And then we talk a lot about dietary considerations, lifestyle considerations, and then how to manage sort of like medications, labs, symptoms, all of those things together. So it's a lot of education, and it's 5 days.
5 days. Yes, I love this. And by the way, so we will put that in the show notes. So you can head over to themodelhealthshow.com and you can get access to that. And wow, so much good stuff here, guys. And I really hope that you've been enlightened as to some bigger understandings about what's going on with your thyroid, intimate connections with your thyroid, and starting to love your thyroid more, like that tiny gland there in your neck is so important, and we need to care for it just like we care for, the abs that we're trying to get, because they're both connected, So Dr. Teta, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate the work that you do. One final question. What is the model that you're here to set with the way that you're living your life?
That's a really great question. I would like to create something that helps alleviate people's physical suffering so they can engage with their life for their higher purpose, so they can connect with their purpose better.
I love it. I
That's what,
love it.
yeah,
Yeah, you're just like, yeah, that's what it is. That's
that's what it is.
exactly and I know that that's something that you probably haven't expressed before in that fashion, but that's exactly what I thought you were going to say, because that's what you do. And I appreciate that, and you are a model for that already with the way that you're living and teaching, and you're somebody who walks your talk, and everybody definitely make sure to check her out online. And can you also share your book really quickly again?
Sure. So my book is called Natural Solutions for Digestive Health. You can find her on Amazon. It's in Barnes and Noble. And then you can find me on Facebook, just facebook.com/fixyourdigestion. And then I'm on Instagram and Twitter at Jillian Teta and bit.ly/thyroid school. And I'll give you guys that free education.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Teta. You are amazing. I'm sure we're going to talk again.
No doubt.
Everybody, thank you so much for tuning into the show today. I got so much value out of this, and I hope that you did as well. And this is an opportunity to understand that we have to stop thinking about our bodies in sections. You are one whole, complete entity, and everything that's a part of you, that's a part of your thoughts, that's a part of your family structure, impacts you every single second of every day, every microsecond. So all of this stuff matters, and it's not about being neurotic about any of this stuff. It's just getting more in alignment with what your genes expect you to do. Taking time and going for that walk in nature, taking time and being there, being present with your food rather than eating a Big Mac while you're driving to drop your kids off. And the Model Health Show listeners, you're probably not indulging in those kinds of behavior, but there are some where you can be like, you know what? Yeah, I am always like browsing through Facebook and social media and watching, random, music videos or whatever, when I should be paying attention because I've been dealing with this issue with my thyroid for so long, and I'm somebody who definitely needs to take this to heart and to pay more attention to these things. So let this be a call to action. I appreciate you so much for tuning into the show today. Take care. Have an amazing day, and I'll talk with you soon.